And there is a renewed enthusiasm in the role that artificial intelligence can play in solving many of society's greatest challenges. But I think for this audience and this forum today, the thing to remember about that is that for many applications of AI, it is nothing without data. And it is nothing without sharing that data. So, you know, for not all AI, but for many data-driven aspects of AI, data is really the kind of underlying lifeblood, I would say, that makes those technologies work in practice. And so I think it's never been more important that the kind of approaches and technologies and considerations that have been considered in PfOD over the last 4 years be brought to bear and be continued to help with this AI revolution that we've found ourselves in now. So with that, I would just again like to welcome everybody to the event today. I'm really looking forward to hearing the panel discussions and the discussion at the end. And you know, a real pleasure to be here. And I look forward to the conversation, and I'll pass you over to Alicia. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And thank you, Andrew, for that brilliant scene setting. And it gives us quite a bit of hope of where we can take all the technologies and where we can go in future. And now we're going to switch gears and get right into our panel sessions. We have 3 panels in quick succession today. And remember, folks, if you want to ask any of the panelists a question during their session, please make use of the Q&A function or ask a question function below in the bottom middle of your screen. Speakers, as I introduce you, please turn on your cameras if you can and ready with that unmute button. So joining me on the first panel to discuss open data discovery and access are Celia Moss, Program Manager in the Data Strategy, Integration and Services Division of the Australian Bureau of Statistics, David Drynan, Assistant Director of the Data Policy Section, Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment, Anna Belgun, Data 61 Project Manager, currently leads the Web Geospatial projects, Shaun Copley, Assistant Director of Geospatial Solutions at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and Simon Knapp, a self-described jack of all trades and leading scientist at Data 61. Celia, let's start with you. You've been a leading figure in all things data strategy, including the APS Data Profession Group, and also the Deputy Chair of the Data Champions Network. Can you share with us what are your thoughts on why open data is so important and so valuable?
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. So yeah, thanks for the invitation to join the forum firstly. And you know, it's always great to have an opportunity to talk about the value, challenges and opportunities of data, which is a topic that I'm really passionate about. So I was going to give a bit of background, but Andrew has stolen my thunder there, so that's fine. Suffice to say, this sort of discussion about open data and democratic government commitments to open data have been you know, a topic of conversation across the world for, you know, 10 to 15 years. And we sort of started, I think, in about 2009. So that 10-year frame that John was talking about is really relevant to the Australian journey in the open data space. Even most recently with the PfOD review, the importance of you know, better use of data, of making data open by default has been highlighted. And in that review, there were a few challenges that were identified and discussed around capability and technologies, and a number of recommendations that have been made to progress our efforts on that front. So over that 10-year period that we've been on this sort of open data journey, the Australian government has invested in all sorts of different things. Initiatives to change data culture, address legislative barriers, build the workforce data capability, increase public trust, and develop technological solutions to address challenges in relation to discoverability, access and use. And that includes through the investment that was made in the Open Platforms for Open Data program. And ABS has been involved in a number of the projects under that program over the past few years, and it's been really gratifying to sort of see that that collaborative effort, and to also be involved in being more innovative with the ways that we can provide, you know, access to the really important data assets that we hold. So thinking about sort of open data itself and perhaps where the challenges remain, for myself, and I suppose many of you who work with data daily, the more data that we get to play with, the better. So that's sort of where we start coming from. But simply making large amounts of data available to the public isn't enough. So that sort of build it and they will come mentality doesn't really achieve the outcomes that we need to achieve through accessibility to open data and use of open data. And Andrew mentioned that there's now 90,000 data sets on data.gov.au. And when you think about it, in terms of the volume of data that is sitting there, we need to make sure that it's not only just there, but it's able to be accessed and used properly. I agree that that the past year has really highlighted starkly the value of sort of timely, right data presented in a way which informs and helps the public understand the current situation, what governments are doing to assist, impacts of these interventions that are being made. But it has also starkly highlighted that there remains many challenges in making appropriate data available to a wide range of audiences. And this, might be through APIs, highly sort of technical context to developers and programmers, for example, making data downloadable for researchers, but also making data available in those sort of visual formats that make it easy for the public to use and understand the data that's being presented. Andrew mentioned sort of some challenges that remain as well, and I think these have been really drawn out and brought to the surface through a recent project which is aiming to reinvigorate the open data agenda, and that's been initiated through the Data Champions Executive. So he describes a number of areas, and I think it's worth just revisiting those before we sort of start talking about some of the projects. So we still need to improve and enhance our tools for data management, discovery and use. So we've made some progress, and I think that the projects under PfOD have been some great examples of where we're moving down the right path, but there's certainly more that needs to be done there. Building data capability, and Celia mentioned the APS Data Professional Stream. So that's an initiative which is all about building the capability of individuals within the APS, both in terms of building data literacy more broadly, but also really building up the skills of the specialists, the sophisticated data users in the APS. And that includes looking forward to some of these areas that John mentioned around emerging AI, machine learning technologies, and how we're going to be needing to really utilise those better in the future.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
The issue around growing public trust. So, making sure that we're actually maintaining privacy of data that we are putting out there, treating that data with the respect that it deserves, and communicating to the public the benefits. So thinking about those sort of stories that we want to tell around how we use data. And I think finally, really prioritising what data we want to make accessible and open, and focusing on those high value data assets that are going to really make the most difference, because as I said, 90,000 data sets sitting in data.gov.au makes it very difficult for people to sort of sift through and understand what is good data to use for what purposes. So I'm going to leave it there. Sorry.
I might just see if we can hold it there and bring some of our other panel colleagues into the discussion.
Perfect timing.
Because I'm curious about, with some of the data sets that have been created, in order to get to that point, we first needed to figure out why we wanted to make some of those data holdings visible, and then how we did that. Now, David, I believe that you were involved in one of those projects early on with Magda. Is that something that I might be able to ask you about? Why was that important to DOR, and how did you go about that process?
Thanks, Celia. Yeah, I think I came into the project about halfway through, but certainly initially what we were after was something, it was a data catalogue that we could use internally within a Department of Environment. And we also were working with the Department of Agriculture, and now we're one. So you guys went from having 2 participants into one single one. So the making of data open wasn't, I don't think initially was actually really on our horizon, but as the project progressed, we realised that this was a Magda in particular had this really nifty capability of being able to have approval workflows and being able to push and publish data to data.gov fairly easily. So where it was appropriate, we saw that as a really good tool to be able to do that in a sort of a well-governed manner, because certainly historically it's always been sort of business areas that have been pushing data out where they've seen it to be appropriate to do so. But this Magda was going to give us some sort of central control over that process, which we thought was a really great feature of it.
And just for the participants who might not be familiar with Magda, and I understand that you were part of the team that co-developed that with David's team. Can you just give us a bit of an overview about what that was?
Yeah, sorry. So the federated Magda, which is the objective of this particular project in this round of PfOD, has actually started with the agency Magda, and they are both platforms basically, or applications based on the open source Magda software that was mentioned a couple of times already. And what that software does, it helps an organization, and we mostly worked with government organizations in this case, but it helps an organization with its core problem of cataloging and managing data. And once you solve or once you tackle that problem, you are basically tackling multiple steps in the data journey, or solving multiple steps like the publishing bit. So once you figured out your catalog and how your inventory works and where to find the data, then you are on your way to fix the publishing, the consumption on data, and the sharing and the consumption on data. The key difference between the agency Magda, which is for one organization, so building an instance for one organization, the federated one, which was the objective of this PfOD round, was to work with a couple of agencies and fixing the sharing of data between them. And introducing Magda in the workflows, internal workflows, was one way to tackle that.
Awesome, thank you for that. And I guess, Celia, to your point, when you said there was 90,000 data sets on data.gov.au, it always finds out that once we solve one area of the problem, which is what David and Anna is talking about, which is how do we actually share the data in the first place, now we get to the next challenge, which is how do we make that data useful and what do we do with it? I'd like to bring some of our other panelists into the conversation. Shaun, you're one of Celia's colleagues at ABS. Can you talk through some of the work that you've done as part of this program?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll start off just by providing a bit of context around the project. So the ABS regularly produce things what we call geographical correspondences, which sort of enable users to convert statistical data between different geographical regions or geographies. So, for example, a user might have some social data from the ABS against our statistical areas. For example, an SA2, a statistical area level 2, and they want to convert that data to a set of administrative boundaries or operational boundaries, for example, health districts, to answer a specific policy question or problem. And so these geographical correspondences sort of enable that transformation. So I guess we set off to develop this project, which was Your Data, Your Region, to address a couple of issues with those correspondence processes. So the first one was accuracy, and looking at if we could use a machine learning algorithm to actually create those conversions or those transformations. So the ABS approach typically weighted correspondence based on the distribution of address locations, while Your Data, Your Region could actually dynamically incorporate other covariates to potentially improve the quality of the outputs that we were producing. We also wanted to produce a service that could provide users correspondences directly through an API service, rather than actually having to come to the ABS and request them. So as it currently stands, ABS has to manually build these correspondences, and then the user actually has to apply them to their data. So this is really about automating that process where the user can access this service to sort of get an end-to-end product.
That's excellent, thank you. And I guess your co-developer, partner in crime, was Simon, who I can't see his video at the moment. But Simon, I'm keen to see if you can share any lessons learned from that process or that project with the rest of the participants today.
Can you hear me though?
We can. You're a bit soft. You might need to speak up.
Okay. I guess was a little bit, your data, your regions was a little bit unusual in that it had 2 PfOD rounds, and the first round, which was done by primarily Alistair Reid and the group that he was in at the time, they've since left Data 61, which is why I inherited it. They really did a lot of the hard work to figure out how to make this fairly robust system for producing these correspondences on the fly and using other data to support that process. They did an amazing job, and we really just dressed it up and brought the thing closer to the users by putting an interface on it and making sure that users knew how to understand or knew how to use the tool and could use the tool via a much friendlier interface than what was in the left at the end of the first project. I think a lot of the challenges there, though, I mean, so I learned a lot through the user design process that we went through. But I think the main challenges is, how do you get this thing into a world? Because it's quite an awkward tool to run for a mass audience. It's, a job itself is very expensive to run. It takes a long time computationally. So providing that as a service to people is going to be quite expensive. You need reasonable compute behind it. And if one person hits a server, it gets difficult for other people to start using it. So I think the challenges are there still ahead. If it ever becomes a thing, it's going to be difficult to actually get it running in a cost-effective way for a mass audience. But I think that can be done. But yeah, so and the other technical challenges is, of course, at first people inside the ABS couldn't actually access the tool because of the whitelisting and security rules and things, which are fairly common, I think, in trying to get new technology out there for public service. Those would be my main comments on the challenges.
Excellent, Simon. Thanks for that. And I guess it also goes back to some of the key points that were raised earlier today, that a lot of the challenges that our government partners face was how to make sure they can get that data and it be trusted by the Australian public. It sounds like what I'm hearing from this panel, there's also an additional challenge when we're developing these new innovations. Once they've reached a certain point, in order to get that adoption, we also need to build that trust and how to get those into the actual agencies themselves. And it strikes me that that's probably one of those open questions that we do need to travel through another journey, if not PfOD, then in the future about how we solve that. I'm just curious to maybe pose a question back to David and Anna. David, when I hear about your story about opening different types of data sets and Shaun's ideas around being able to have a geospatial mapping of some of that data, it strikes me that some of the technology that's come out of Data 61 recently has then extended what we've built on PfOD out into other areas. Is that something that you've all worked on together? And I don't know who wants to take that, whether it can be David or Shaun or Anna, whether you'd like to, pick that one up.
Yeah, I'll say a few words and then obviously anyone can contribute. But although it seems the agency Magda, federated Magda, and the whole Magda technology or library has been in particular of use for data.gov.au and any other open data portals out there, we actually use that technology and further developed it as a fundamental building block for digital twins. So we are on this journey for, 18, 24 months now, where we started prototyping New South Wales digital twin, then further developed that into a fully production system and added Queensland digital twin. And we are on the journey to, build and develop a national digital twin approach. And Magda, with its capability for data management, cataloging, and later on authorization, because the digital twin, one of the challenges for digital twin is publishing and sharing non-open and non-open data or non-public data between agencies, because it includes data like infrastructure and utilities and other things. It has been of tremendous help. So yeah, it's a really good outcome of the number of rounds.
And that sounds like kind of going back to one of Celia's earlier points, which is once we've got all this data that's open, we need to start being able to do something with it so end users can really touch it. And then that sounds like, Shaun, that's what your project was about in your data, your regions. And Anna, that sounds like where the next step has gone about making that data really tangible and useful to make decisions. Now, I'm recognising we are pressed for time, so we might need to continue on. There was a question that came through the chat around metadata availability. I might just see whether Simon or Anna could take a look in the chat and perhaps respond to that question if you do know the answer. But panel number one, if we were in the room, I'd give you a round of applause, but unfortunately it's just me that you'll hear. So thank you very much for your participation. We'll have to continue on to panel number two.